We're here at the CROI in Boston, and we're here with Kristine Erlandson, who is doing presenting a study at the posters today, frailty study from the HALO study. Nested, is it nested? Is that what it was, or is it?
It is. HALO is the transition from ALERT, which was the longitudinal aging study, and this included all HALO participants.
Okay, I gotcha. Okay, so this study was interesting. I'd let you. Why don't you just give us the take on it?
So we looked at frailty phenotype, which is slowness, weakness, fatigue. It's kind of less physical activity by self-report, and weight loss. And if someone had 3 or more of those characteristics, we wanted to see what factors were associated with frailty in our population. About 6% of the almost 1,000 people in the cohort were frail, and about a third were sort of in this pre-frail state where they were at risk of becoming frail. Some of the interesting findings, or we also looked at the 4-meter walk, which is a good measure of mortality in the general population. We wanted to see what characteristics were also associated with a slow 4-meter walk speed. So just a real short distance from here to there. That's a simple test people can do in the clinic. We found that in the frail group, or we found that several characteristics were associated with increasing frailty. Prior randomized therapy to an NNRTI, primarily efavirenz, was associated with frailty. Really? Although it wasn't the duration of efavirenz, and it wasn't current efavirenz. So something about having gotten that drug as their initial therapy was associated with that.
Even if they got on it and failed within the first month?
We didn't look at the duration. So any duration was not. We didn't see any association with that. So we didn't. If someone was on it for a really long time, it wasn't associated, and if it was a short time,
we didn't see anything. Degree of frailty.
Yep. Yeah. And then one of the interesting findings is also that we saw a strong association between if someone exercised had moderate or vigorous exercise, which she defined as if someone exercised 3 or more days a week, then that was protective against frailty. We saw a slight association with smoking, and then we saw
only a slight association.
Yeah, it didn't end up as it wasn't as strong as physical activity was actually much stronger association. And then with neurocognitive impairment. And interestingly, we still saw that association with efavirenz even when we adjusted for neurocognitive impairment. So that didn't seem to be a neurocognitive effect there. And then with the 4-meter walk, we also saw that strong association with physical activity and neurocognitive impairment. And with the 4-meter walk speed, we saw a protective effect of integrase inhibitor. And that was current integrase inhibitor, so at the same time as the frailty, or as the frailty assessment, the 4-meter walk. With the integrase inhibitor, it was not the randomized therapy, so the opposite of the efavirenz, and still the same thing with duration of the integrase inhibitor didn't make a difference. Because being on a current integrase inhibitor was protective for that. So
at the time of the study.
At the time of the assessment.
Assessment, right.
So
that's amazing. So where do you go from here? I mean, you learned a lot, but you know every study that you do answers one question and
brings up more questions. Yeah. So I think there's a few things to follow up from this study. One is the association with the NNRTI. So we're trying to sort out a few different analyses, and I think we'll change how we look at it just to make sure we're not missing something, the adjustments, that there's not some piece that we could adjust for that would explain that. So looking at, if we can find glucose levels, HOMA-IR, some of the other measures of insulin sensitivity to see if it's an effect of that. We didn't see that diabetes explained any of that relationship, but in some prior studies we've seen an association between efavirenz and worsened insulin sensitivity, worsening insulin resistance, so some potential signal there that we can investigate. And then with the integrase inhibitor, I think looking at some of our other integrase inhibitor studies, we definitely haven't seen a big difference with changes in lean mass that might be suggestive of muscle mass, but I think the more we can include these physical function measures and measures of frailty in our ongoing studies will give us more and more information about this. So this is one of the first times we've actually had a chance to look at the direct relationship, or the relationship between randomized therapy and not other things that go into influencing therapy. So I think one would be including those measures and subsequent
studies. And you have
studies.
those, just have to mine them
So we have them in HALO. They're actually not included in very many other studies within the...
So you did what you'd find in all the studies. You find what you would call the issues that would be...
There are several other cohorts that include some of these physical function measures, like the 4-meter walk and some of the grip strength and some of those, like the MAX cohort and the WISE cohort include those in a lot of their participants.
Could you do a protocol with a company that, I don't know if it's some other study, you could nest your next one into something else?
Yeah, we've actually... we'd like to get some of these measures introduced into the REPRIEVE study to see how statins impact some of these physical function measures, and that's something we propose that we're working on. So stay tuned.
Because it makes a whole lot of sense, because I'm a big proponent of nested studies, because you can certainly, why not gain more knowledge?
Do as much as you can without making it. I mean, it's a balance. If we don't want to make it burdensome for the participants either, but if it's... And I think what's nice about these physical function measures, at least what we've heard from HALO, is the participants really like them. It gives them immediate feedback, because they can see, like, my grip strength was this last year, it seems about the same this year. So I think it's one thing that kind of gives them feedback right away, and they know how they're doing. So
have you seen the walking study? I think it was an Italian study a couple of years back. They called it, the gait was a special indicator for a progression to death.
Yeah, gait is a really strong indicator, and there was
all this seems logical.
Oh yeah,
but it's nice that you can see it and say, okay, it's measurable. We can actually determine this is true.
And what I think is really interesting, like, the gait speed is the 4-meter walk, which really isn't very far. I mean, that's essentially someone walking from less than the time it takes to walk, or it's like half the distance from a waiting room to an exam room. It's a very short distance, but you can learn a lot just in how someone walks. So I think it's an easy evaluation to do in the clinical setting. You don't need a lot of space, and I think it gives us a lot of information on how someone can move, their energetics, just so much information from that. So.
Well, I appreciate that. Is there anything else you want to impart to our audience before we go?
I'd like to put a plug in for that exercise component, and I think we saw that physical activity definitely was strongly associated with frailty, or the lack of physical activity rather. And we actually had another analysis from the same cohort looking at impairment in some independent activities of daily living, so how well people do their transportation, their grocery shopping, their housework, and saw that same strong association with physical activity. So I think it's just another emphasis of how important general health is and being active, and even if it's not going to the gym 5 days a week for an hour, but just getting out and taking the stairs, parking at the far end of the parking lot, and how much more physical activity can benefit people in the long term. So
I had a 105-year-old lady in my block who dragged all of the other older folks that were 80 and 70 and 80 and 90 around the block, just doing what you're saying. Just go around the block with me.
Get out and get some fresh air.
And so many of she'd be able to save some, but others would die. They just die because of inactivity and sedentary lifestyle.
And even
and this lady lived 105. I mean,
that's impressive.
It's logical. There's nothing here you're talking about that says, oh my goodness, big surprise. It's
things we've known.
But we need to define it, and characterize it.
And I think sometimes seeing that in a study and showing, yes, it really does matter.
Doctors can now say, doctors can say, they can say, well, there's no proof, but exercise could be good. Now you can say there is proof that exercise is good.
And
so that's why we do research.
The more and more proof we get. It's hard to exercise, but the more and more proof we get, I think the more we can kind of.
Well, this I have to tell you, is what's really meaningful to our audience, because they're the ones that have to be convinced, and obviously not stop smoking or stop drinking, and the drinking you've explained. So this is a very profoundly important study, and I know that we wanted to have you on that other panel with what's her name, Lake and Don Brown.
Metabolic,
But it's good that you had the opportunity to do this separately, because you can delve into it and get more details. If a person wants to dig more into this study, how can they find it?
So they can look on the ACTG website. There's more information about Halo. They're more than welcome to email me, and we can connect them to it. It's a huge study that we have almost 1,000 participants who have been so grateful to be in alert and then continue with the Halo study for another 7 years of follow-up. So I think we'll get such valuable information about aging in people that are taking their antiretroviral therapy and got started on it relatively early. So it's kind of a more healthy aging study. So
We talk about aging and how it affects, it's accentuated aging or accelerated, whatever you want to characterize it. But the important thing to know is that we can minimize that aging effect by increasing your metabolism. Exercising, moving every day, or as much as you can, maybe becoming even more athletic. I mean, as long as you're doing it progressively, especially when you're as old as I am, you want to do it progressively, incrementally increase. Don't do like my dad does, run a mile when he hadn't run a mile since he was a kid. You don't do stuff like that.
Make sure your heart's safe.
Make sure your heart is safe, and then move slowly, and then and join the gym and whatever else you want to do, but progressively. Start out with around the block, then walk 2 blocks, and then go from there. But I appreciate you doing what you're doing, and I appreciate you doing the research you're doing, because if we didn't have this, the doctors wouldn't be able to say, we prove it's good to do exercise. So there you have it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.